Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here. Mr. Secretary, the name of this committee is called the Budget Committee. Obviously, every member of this committee is concerned about record-breaking deficits and a $12 trillion national debt. I have to say, and I say this to my friend Senator Gregg, as I suggested through the chairman last week, that I understand that we've got to look forward and not backwards. That's clear. We're all in agreement on that. But I do get a little bit tired of being lectured about how serious the deficit crisis is today by, in many instances, the exact same people who caused the deficit crisis. And I want to make this clear so I don't have to repeat it at every meeting that we're in. I, and many of us, did not vote for the Bush tax breaks, which cost $600 billion over a 10-year period, without any payment for them. I believe Senator Gregg and many others on the other side did vote for those. I did not vote for the war in Iraq for a number of reasons, not least of which there was no mechanism to pay for that war. I believe my Republican friend, Senator Gregg, did vote for that war. I did not, when I was in the House, vote for the insurance company and drug company prescription drug Medicare bill, which could have been paid for by negotiating pharmaceutical prices with the drug industry. Many of my Republican friends voted for that. Senator Gregg, you voted against it, but you voted to waive the budget rule so that it, in fact, did not have to be paid for. I did not vote for the Wall Street bailout of $700 billion. And in fact, I brought forth an amendment which said that if you were right, if the Bush administration was right, let's pay for it. Let's do a surtax on the very wealthiest people in this country, so if it was needed, it could be paid for. I do not support, as Senator Gregg does, the repeal of the estate tax, which would provide $1 trillion in tax breaks to wealthiest 0.3% over a 10-year period. So all that I say to and Senator Gregg is a good friend of mine. We're neighbors. He is a serious guy. But please don't lecture us when many of us voted exactly in opposition to running up the huge deficit that we have. My question is, do you agree?
I agree that Senator Gregg is a careful, thoughtful person with a great record on fiscal responsibility, and I agree with you. That I agree with you.
You agree with Senator Gregg and myself. Now, that's a tough one, right?
Well, you know, we're all trying to find common ground. And I agree with you that it's important for people to recognize that we're living today with the choices made over a long period of time to not pay for new things that are very expensive.
Well, that's true, but I think you're being too gentle in saying there were people who voted to run up a huge national debt, and some people of us didn't. The past is the past. I acknowledge that. We've got to look to the future. But it's not fair to say, well, all of us did this. Some of us didn't do it. All right. Now let me get to areas where you don't agree with me. I applaud the President for keeping in his budget a proposal to let all of the Bush tax breaks for the wealthiest 2% expire at the end of this year. My question is, why didn't the President propose repealing these tax breaks for the wealthy right now, which I understand would have brought in another $100 billion in that one-year period? We have, as you know, Mr. Secretary, the most unequal distribution of income and wealth. I think Senator Whitehouse made some very appropriate references to the outrage that the American people are feeling as the middle class collapses and the people on top get, tens of millions of dollars in bonuses. What's the problem with beginning to address that problem now?
Listen, I just want to say, and I completely agree with you, that our system today, our tax system today is not fair, and the burdens are not shared equally.
So why aren't we moving aggressively to address,
Well, they're scheduled to expire at the end of this year, and we think that's the right time for them to expire.
Why?
But it's not soon.
Why? I mean, in other words, you're right, they are scheduled, but you could have...
I don't think it was necessary to pull them forward, and as you know, we are trying to balance the basic imperative of trying to make sure that we are all focused on doing everything we can to fix what was damaged in this recession. We're going to keep our priority on that, but we think the country can afford to let those tax cuts expire, and we think it's time to do some modest things to make the system more fair, and that's part of it.
Well, I don't know that I agree with you. I don't.
I didn't expect you would on this, but I think that's the best way to state the rationale.
Okay. I think underlying, everybody here knows that there's a tremendous amount of anger out there and it's manifested in many ways. I think the Wall Street bailout and the bonuses given to the people who helped cause the worst recession in the modern history of America is certainly an integral part of that appropriate outrage. And I think that the faster the Obama administration says that we are going to address the reality, all right? You say we can't move fast. We have 19% of our children living in poverty. That is the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world, right? That is an international disgrace. And yet we have a totally inadequate child care system, totally inadequate educational system, which the president understands. So I don't think it's a good enough response to say, well, we're moving along a timeline. People are increasingly frustrated about income and wealth inequality in America. You are doing some steps that are right, but I would hope that you would be more aggressive on that. Now, let me ask you a next question. We bailed out our friends on Wall Street whose dishonesty and greed has resulted in some 17% of our people being unemployed or underemployed, a total economic disaster. One of the outrages, when we talk about why people are angry, one of the reasons is we bail out these banks, Citigroup, Bank of America, et cetera, and then they charge people 25, 30% interest rates on their credit card. Will the administration come forward and say, that is usury, that is immoral, that's wrong? We should do with the private banking system what credit unions do, have a cap of 15%, except under exceptional circumstances, go to 18%. Can the administration come forward and say, banks, no more than 15 plus 3 on your interest rates on credit cards?
Senator, I support the Congress took last year in putting into place sweeping reforms of consumer credit practices to try to end the abuse and predation that we saw across the system. That was a tragic failure of government. I'm very supportive of those changes. We'll be happy to work with the Congress on additional reforms like we're doing in financial reform. I personally do not support the imposition of a cap on interest rates, but because I don't think it's the best way to try to make sure we're preventing abuse and predation, but I understand why you support that. I respect your views on it.
Well, it's not hard to understand. Talk to anybody, talk to any of the hundreds of people who have called my office and you will understand it. Tell me why we should not address a situation where a working person, do you agree that 25 or 30% interest rates is usury?
Look, what I believe very strongly, and I think this is a deep failure of government, is that we allowed a level of abuse and predation to happen across the system with appalling, terrible consequences. And I think it's very good that Congress moved last year, even in the depths of the crisis, to start to address that. But that's why we're working so hard to try to make sure that we are putting in place a broader set of reforms.
You're not answering, oh, well, I guess you are answering. You don't agree. I mean, you could do all the kind of talking you want, but people will still be paying 25 or 30%.
No, we have to act. We can't talk about it. I agree with
well,
that.
but you don't agree with me. You don't support a cap on interest rate. Last question. We're running out of time. There is widespread support for more transparency at the Fed. Above and beyond the TARP, we lent out trillions of dollars at zero-interest loans. Secretary of the Fed Bernanke refuses to tell us who received those loans. Do you believe that the American people have a right to know who received trillions of dollars, which financial institutions received trillions of dollars of zero-interest loans?
I personally am very supportive and will work to help support broader improvements in transparency by the Federal Reserve System. But I think it is very important we not take steps that would undermine, and you're not proposing this, I don't believe, undermine the independence of the Fed or put us in a position where the Fed's ability to do what was absolutely essential in this crisis.
Do you support letting the American people know who received trillions of dollars of zero-interest loans?
Well, again, as I said, and there is a very good constructive set of reform proposals now working its way through the Senate that would bring substantially greater transparency, and I will support those. But the two qualifications I would put on it, just to be direct, and I'm disagreeing with you respectfully, is not to threaten the independence of it and not to limit the Fed's capacity to do the essential thing in future crises.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.